Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching. We have Ty Landrum connecting with us today. Thank you, Ty, for being here.
Thank you, Carmen, for having me.
Very excited that we are on the same time zone today. You're in Spain these days.
Yes.
Is it teaching a program, what you're doing?
No, I'm actually just spending some time here. I've been on a farm just north of Aracena since October, with my whole family, and we've just been like spending a lot of time together, going on walks in the woods, working on some writing projects, and yeah, just enjoying some downtime.
Very nice. Well, I love your background with the green and the red.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes, this is a beautiful open air shala. This place is called Finca El Moro. It is a yoga retreat center. It's been sort of more of an equestrian center, but now it's kind of coming into the hands of a younger generation, namely my friend Daisy, and she's doing more yoga retreats here. So I look forward to doing a yoga retreat here probably in 2024.
That's fantastic. We'll probably go visit you now that you're going to be around in Spain, which it's something that we're going to talk about later. So you and I met quite recently. Actually, we were neighbors last summer in Portugal. You were running a program for teachers, and we were shala neighbors.
Right.
So got the chance to spend some time with some of your students and assistants and fellow teachers. We also got to spend some time with your lovely family and your wonderful kids. And so you came to mind. I really welcome the opportunity to talking to you and having you on this podcast. So thank you so much for making this.
Thank you.
I suppose that a good place to start is from the beginning, really. So it's an icebreaker. Like, how do you start doing yoga? And so that people get a little more familiar with your first steps. And
yeah, I mean, I came to it pretty late. I was 30 years old, and I had just started a PhD program in philosophy. And so I just moved to a new part of the United States. I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, and on the advice of a friend, I took a yoga class, and it was led primary, full primary. That was my introduction to yoga. Yeah,
that's a good start.
Yeah, I was astonished. It just how totally unreasonable it was that that they would ask people off the street to do these things with their bodies. I thought it was so fantastic. So.
Yeah, I remember, it's actually funny. I remember once I spent some time with T. Miller in the West Coast. And I remember how some people joined the lead primary series class right away. And I always thought, these people are either bald or they just don't know what they're getting into.
They had no idea what they're getting into.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And then Ty, you met Richard Freeman at some point.
Yeah.
I studied with him for a long time, if I am correct. So how did that happen? How did it come about?
I guess that was about 10 years ago. So I'd already been doing yoga with a student of his for about 7 years. And, I'd always wanted to meet him because my teacher, Jennifer Eliot, spoke so highly of him. And also because I'd seen this old Yoga Works video with Patabi Joyce counting, and this Tim Miller, Chuck Miller, Mahdi Asrati, Richard, who else was there? David Swenson, I think, was in that video. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. But anyways, you know the ones I mean. That's videos. So I saw that series of videos, and I saw it pretty early on, and it really impressed me, especially this one guy, who I later learned was Richard Freeman, the way that it seemed to be like something was moving him from the inside. And I was so fascinated with that. And I wanted to experience that. I remember telling myself, I'm going to do this until I can feel what he's feeling, whatever that is. So that was a big deal for me. And so I really wanted to meet him for a long time, but I was a poor graduate student and could never go anywhere. So it wasn't until I graduated. And then that summer, I made my way to Boulder, and and that's the first time I actually met him in person. And I met my wife there too on the first day that I arrived in Boulder.
On the first day?
Yes.
What a start.
It was wild. It was, I'll give you a juicy detail, which was I used to go into this place in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia and meditate a lot, and in the afternoons. And I was there once just sitting on these rocks, and I suddenly got it into my head somehow, as if a voice spoke it to me, that I was going to Boulder. And actually, at the time, I didn't even realize that Richard Freeman lived in Boulder. I had it in my mind that he lived somewhere. I don't know what I thought. This was before social media, and I didn't keep track of such things so much. But I got it in my mind that I was going to go to Boulder, and I was wanting at that time to step away from academia. I was wanting to sort of, find a good reason to fall off of that path. And I was studying Ayurveda a lot at the time. And so I went home and I looked up Ayurveda courses in Boulder and saw that there was one starting a week later.
Wow.
And so I thought, oh, this must be it. This is calling to me. So I went there, and I arrived, actually really, really early in the morning. And on the way there, I looked up and found, like, where am I going to practice in the morning? And like, oh my God, the yoga workshop is there. It's Richard Freeman's studio. I'll go practice there in the morning. So I went to a coffee shop that opened at like 6. They do that in the US, and got a coffee. And then the shala opened at, I think, 6:30. And the guy I met there, the barista, is like, to this day, my best Boulder friend. The guy I met.
Wow.
The first person I met. And then the second person I met was my wife, because as soon as I walked in the shala, she was like, the old yoga workshop, it didn't have a proper entryway or anything. It was just one room. So when you open the door, if you didn't know what to expect, it could be like super intimidating. Literally, we'd have people would sometimes open the door and look, and then just shut the door, and you never see them again, because you open the door and there's all these, half-naked, writhing, sweaty bodies doing Mysore. If you don't know what you're getting into, you just, so I opened the door, and there was, I almost hit the door. I almost hit this person who was practicing right next to the door. And she stood up and kind of just like stared at me. She said, "Hey, I know you." And I said, "I don't think we've met." And then suddenly she looked like she went flush and looked sort of embarrassed, like she had this moment of self-consciousness, and she just went back and practiced. And I was like, that was so strange. And then I was like, I think I know that person too. And then anyways, and I went and I practiced. And then after I practiced, I went to a coffee shop, and she was there sitting right by the door again, which was bizarre. And so I walked in, sat down, and talked to her. And 3 months later, we were engaged. But anyways, I'll give you the Ayurveda course fell apart in short order. I didn't like the teacher at all, and that rarely happens. But I just really, and I tried. After a few days, I was like, "This is not the reason I'm here," and I told Mary Taylor, because she was teaching the Mysore class. I said, "Yeah." She said, "How's that course working out?" "No, not so good, really. I'm over it. I'm done with it." And she said, "Well, we're doing our month-long intensive. It starts on Wednesday, and a spot just opened up, and there's a waiting list. But since you're here, we'd love to have you." So I jumped over into that course, and then it was on that Monday that I met Richard Freeman. And then also, as things would have it, my wife, Shayan, was also in that course. So then, I saw her every day that way. And, yeah. And so then at the end of the summer, they asked me because they asked me what I was doing. I actually had a tenure track position teaching philosophy at the University of Virginia, but they asked me what I was doing. I said, I don't know, because my heart wasn't really in it. And they said, well, would you like to come teach Mysore here? And I said, yes.
That's so cool.
So I declined the real job for the yoga teaching position. And that was for sure the best bad decision I had made up to that point.
Yeah. Well, it looks like your arrival in Boulder was divinely orchestrated, we could say. It was divinely guided.
It felt that way. Yeah.
The first day you meet your best friend, you meet your wife, you make it to Richard Freeman's and Mary Taylor's intensive course, the one that goes on in the summer. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And then you get a job teaching.
Yeah.
You decline the
And
real job.
And then fast forward a year and a half, I think it was, and they asked Shayan and I to we kind of inherited the yoga studio from them. They asked us to take it over, and so we ran the yoga workshop for another 5 years. Yep. And then we lost the lease on the building and just kind of let the whole thing go.
Yeah, and I remember this fantastic video. Well, in fact, you appear on that video as well, it was shot in the yoga workshop, and I'm wondering if it was that location, the Yoga Ruins Your Life one.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. But
fantastic video.
It is, and it was an amazing space. I mean, it was that studio was an Ashtanga studio for 30 years. So when it closed, it was the oldest Ashtanga studio in the U.S. And but these, how it is, these mandalas get blown away by the wind eventually.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
But it was a special space. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, what you mentioned about the mandalas, it just I was very vividly seeing one mandala, and it reminded me of this Buddhist practice of just like creating something beautiful.
Yes.
Then
blowing it away.
Yeah.
Letting the wind wash it away. Yeah.
I remember I was
destroy it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is one personal story, but I remember I was part of a writers group, and I came up with that example in one of my pieces once, and one of my writers buddies, she said, I cannot believe that I will be writing a novel to then burn it. It's like, that's basically what these monks are doing, creating something beautiful and then just let it disappear.
Yeah.
So something that I've been thinking, this is a self-reflection. I lived in London for some time, and there is like a very strong figure in London, which is who is Hamish Henry. And I've seen that in other places like Encinitas, Tim Miller. I assume that it should be something similar, maybe around Richard Freeman, when you have this type of teachers that have so much experience, that have been around for so long. Many times you get practitioners from all over the place flocking to them.
Absolutely.
And a really vibrant community creates. So how was your experience, and how was your experience with it? How did you experience that?
I mean, it was sheer joy, that community there in Boulder, that had gathered around Richard Freeman. It did indeed have people who had moved there from all over the world to study yoga. And so it was just super vibrant. And that's so, it's stimulating, it's inspiring. it really provokes lots of reflection. So it was a really fertile, really sort of fertile soil, you know, out of which to grow. Yeah, those things are so wonderful, you know, and that never lasts forever, you know. But I've had the
Like the mandala.
yeah, and but also the community that I came from was also extremely rich in Virginia. It was, you know, there's a small, it's pretty small place. I mean, I think probably most Europeans haven't even heard of Charlottesville, Virginia.
Yeah, that's where Carol Ann's Shala is.
Yeah, that's right.
Correct? Yeah.
I mean, Carol Ann Shala was the Shala that I mean, she kind of inherited that Shala from my first teacher. Yeah,
Oh.
during the pandemic. Actually,
Oh,
Carol
yeah.
took her first Ashtanga, her first Mysore class there. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
That's cool. What's
yeah.
your teacher's name again? Your first teacher's name?
Jennifer Eliot.
Jennifer Eliot. Okay.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah,
Please carry on.
yeah. So and there there's this, they had a little urban shala, like quite small but always super vibrant. And then out in the country, maybe, you know, a 10-kilometer drive or something, there was a big barn, and it had been renovated inside. It was just gorgeous, and it was filled with light. It had a, like, up on the top floor, and it could hold, like, I don't know, 50, 60 people.
Mhm.
And so they would regularly have, you know, some of the best Ashtanga teachers in the world would come there. So Tim Miller used to come every year. David Garrigues came every year. Lino Mile came at least once that I remember. Kino McGregor came. Dharma Mitra came. And there were many others. And I mean, it seemed that we had like half a dozen such high profile teachers giving workshops there every year to,
That's
you know,
fantastic.
yeah, it was just really amazing. I didn't realize how good I had it, of course, at the time. You know, and then I went from there to Boulder and, you know, had it amazingly well there too. So it's only been sort of since the demise of the yoga workshop, and then I've kind of been, you know, casting around for the next thing, and turning down a lot of, you know, other, you know, possibilities, kind of hoping for, you know, the next right thing to materialize. But I realize now, you know, how precious that was, and
Mhm.
how fortunate I was to have that last for so long. You know, that was a 15-year stretch of just being in awesome yoga communities. So, yeah.
It sounds like that, having like people so experienced, so talented, and also so generous.
Yes.
The generosity coming from teachers, it's like what changes everything. It was what makes all the difference, really.
It sure does. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Tai, I am jealous in a very healthy way. That's something we say in Spain. I'm jealous, but in a healthy way. So you mentioned, maybe we can dive into the yoga a
Yes.
little bit more now. And you mentioned that when you saw Richard Freeman on that video with Pataviju is practicing along Tim Miller and Eddie Stern, all these very experienced and accomplished practitioners, and you saw something that was coming from him, and you wanted to experience that. And I've listened to you in some chats and some videos as well, and I can see, or I can feel that deep embodiment, if you like, of the practice of the yoga. I see it as well. And when you talk philosophy, when you start talking about Shiva and Shakti and all these concepts. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on all this. Like, I suppose when I'm asking, or what I am getting at, is the practice as an internal or an inner experience more than something that you perform.
Yes. So, I mean, that whole idea of sort of tuning in to the internal breath and then allowing the internal movements of the breath to animate you from the inside, that, is very much, part of Hatha yoga as it was taught to me, from Jennifer Eliot, from all those other teachers, and of course, from Mary Taylor and Richard Freeman. And I think from Richard, I really learned how to arrange the internal conditions through postural alignment by working with the two patterns of prana and apana, to arrange for the circumstances for that internal breath to really move with greater force, so that you can sort of, surrender to it in a way. And it kind of gains a certain momentum if you keep holding the alignment just right as you're breathing. And with that momentum, it starts to sort of draw you, forward through the practice. And that gives you a great sense of continuity between your inner experience and like the way that you're moving your body, which is happening like in the outer world. So there's a sense of, a sense of continuity, a sense of sort of like seamlessness between inner and outer experience when yoga is practiced in that way. And you experience that mentally as a kind of fluidity in the flow of your thoughts, the stream of your thoughts. So when you're breathing really rhythmically and moving really rhythmically, then your thoughts themselves start to kind of stream, and memories and emotion and sensation all starts to kind of stream and cycle in a particular kind of way. And as I understand it, that experience is a kind of initiatory step into Hatha yoga. And it's also the step that is symbolized by the image of Patanjali that we have in the second verse of the Ashtanga invocation, where Patanjali is described as having a serpent's head made of a thousand other serpents' head, and a serpent's tail that connects him to the earth. And it's said that those serpent heads are all singing in different languages. And it doesn't say that in the chant, but traditionally, it's in many other places, it's described that way. Because Patanjali is an avatar of Ananta Shesha, who is primordial prakriti, or sort of, creative energy, unmanifest. And there it's manifesting, especially because he comes into form as Patanjali. And the serpent's hood itself represents prana. And prana is associated with inspiration and imagination. And so those serpent heads that are all singing in different languages represent all of the different perspectives that he might take on any given moment of his experience. And he's listening to all of them at the same time without allowing any one of them to distract him out of the present moment. So in other words, he's not caught in any particular stream of thought, but he's also not focusing his attention away from the sphere of embodiment. Do you see what I mean? It's as if his consciousness is fully opened to all of the sort of effusion of sensation and thought and memory that is coming, up from the unconscious mind, and he's allowing it to spread itself out in the space of his embodied consciousness. And he's listening to all of those different streams simultaneously. And what's allowing him to do that is the fact that he's so tethered to the earth with his serpent's tail. So his aponic energy, the dissolving energy, the energy that's associated with exhaling, the energy that's raised with the use of the bandhas, to meet the prana so that it's excited and expands. That energy is sort of being held continuously. And so, I mean, look, what does that mean? Well, it could physiologically, it could mean that you're doing good Mula Uddiyana Bandha. Mentally, then it means that the soft palate and physiologically, the soft palate stays released so that you're not your attention's not getting caught up in any particular thread of thought.
Mhm.
Right? So that it's all just being allowed to flow. And when it's allowed to flow, I'll stop this train of thought in 1 second. But when it's allowed to flow, it's as if that creative energy that is prana, because the background philosophy, of course, here is that prana shapes everything. Prana is the vital force. So the whole body is a sort of manifestation. It's orchestrated by the intelligence of prana. And your thoughts themselves are crystallizations of prana, right? And that all of that creative energy, it wants to kind of pour forth. And when it does, we're sort of creatively involved in the world and we evolve. When we resist that flow and we sort of suppress the creative movement of our vitality, then our development gets stunned, it gets stagnated, it gets stunted. And we, and our mental lives, our emotional lives start to dry up. They become barren. We start to wither, And so this practice of breathing deeply, moving rhythmically, drawing up these creative currents and allowing them to flow is what allows us to feel continuously renewed, refreshed, revitalized, and for energy to move through our lives so that the situations in which we find ourselves are also naturally breaking apart and evolving and growing anew, so that we're not stagnating. No.
This is a fantastic approach. And I remember when I lived in London, I went to one workshop with Richard Freeman, and it was mind-blowing. And he was talking about these things, about the prana and the apana. I was not so familiar with these concepts back then. But what I liked about it, and I can see in the way you talk about it as well, and what really resonated was that it's something that you don't think. You don't need, if you think about it, all those thoughts are going to get on the way. So it's more mind driven, just like everything else that we do. We don't need more mind. It's more that embodied experience of just breathing and understanding the inner dynamics of that breath.
Yes.
And then if you're a bit of a poet, or if you're into books or stuff like that, if you're into literature, then you can take it to more ethereal realms, if you like. And,
sure.
So you were talking about this creative energy, this pranic energy, this life force that's vibrating within us, and it's renewing and rejuvenating us. And in the more, I suppose, in a more tantric concept, when we talk about the Shiva and the Shakti, we can also talk about in yoga philosophy, we can talk about Purusha and the Prakriti. So how these two, the prana and the apana, how these two realities intertwine?
Yes. So Shiva and Shakti represent archetypal principles. And the mythology of Shiva and Shakti dramatizes different archetypal movements, right, between things. And you say, well, which things exactly? And the whole point is that with mythology, what mythology does is it shows us dynamics between certain patterns that reiterate themselves on many different levels of reality at the same time. So they involve different items, but they play out in similar kind of patterned dynamic ways, right? And so mythology helps us to tune our minds to those patterns so that we can see them playing out in different levels of our own experience, okay? Now, with all of that said, you might say that, typically Shiva is taken to represent pure consciousness or consciousness as such. And Shakti is creative energy. And she's the creative energy that's internal to consciousness. So they're both aspects of consciousness, really. And you might say that Shiva is then the spaciousness of consciousness, its dimension of spatiality, its natural openness, right? And that because there has to be a kind of opening of awareness to receive phenomenon, or there is no phenomenon, right?
Mhm.
And the idea is that then that consciousness opens to receive the spontaneous creative outpouring of creative energy. And the world just is the opening of consciousness to that outpouring. That's how it's created. I mean, this is a whole, cosmologically, that's how those principles are understood. But it's also sometimes understood that when Shakti creates, she opens the space of consciousness, right? So that you can describe it from two different ways, such that they each depends on the other. And what Shiva wants to do is let's say what Shakti really wants more than anything is to be experienced. So she wants to be heard, she wants to be seen, she needs Shiva's attention. And there's so many myths about this, that what inspires Shakti to dance is the gaze of Shiva, right?
Aw.
And when Shiva turns his attention away and he closes in on himself and he just meditates on the abyss of his own consciousness, she stops dancing. Okay. Now, there's already that's a kind of echo of the idea in the Yoga Sutra that Purusha, which is the term that Patanjali uses for sort of pure consciousness that which is precisely what Prakriti is not, and Prakriti is creative energy. That when those two principles are entangled, Prakriti starts to dance, right? Prakriti dances, the gunas start to churn when Prakriti is somehow involved with consciousness. And when they're disentangled from one another, Prakriti, Patanjali says, I forget which sutra it is, but it's near the end, that Prakriti, that he basically says the world ceases to exist for the Purusha that is totally disentangled from Prakriti, which means she stops dancing, right? Because in the classical yoga of Patanjali, the whole point of the yoga is to disentangle Purusha and Prakriti, right? To completely separate them so that consciousness is, because consciousness abides in its self form only when it's fully disentangled from Prakriti. Okay. And, that's that idea of that. Then, so the basic idea is that we can escape from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth by tuning our attention into the abyss of consciousness, allowing all of our, our sort of patterned ways of cycling energy to expend themselves within us, allowing all that to burn out. And so that our Purusha, our consciousness, can sort of abide in its own form, disentangled from the world. That's classical yoga, but then the tantras have a very different idea of yoga, and I think one that is just, I don't know, one that really resonates much better with modern sensibilities. So that idea that the goal of yoga or the goal of life is to escape from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth is an idea that you had all over the ancient world, not just in classical yoga, but in ancient Greece and Egypt, in so many places. And nowadays, that doesn't seem to be such a sort of dominating concern for most people, I think. I think nowadays we're sort of more interested, I certainly am more interested in a yoga that helps one to more fully embrace life. Because one has the experience of not being fully awake. right? Like I do, I know I do. And like has the experience of sometimes like breaking out of the confines of consciousness into a world that is utterly enchanted and magical, and then being drawn back down again to where things kind of seem maybe kind of not so multi-dimensional, a little flat, a little dismal, perhaps, lots of politics happening and things like that.
Yeah.
And so to sort of to awaken in this life, to sort of wake up more fully. I mean, we don't have to think of it as you're not awake or awake, but to sort of maybe there's a progression of awakening where you sort of keep waking up to to what's actually happening, to the flow of creative energy within yourself, and experiencing greater and greater kind of surrender to that, trust in that, and intimacy with that creative source of your being while you're alive, without really any concern for what's going to happen in your next incarnation, or whether or not you're going to escape from earth, or what have you. And that seems like an idea of yoga that is a bit more compelling, I think, for modern sensibilities. And the philosophy of the Tantra, which of course builds and borrows in many ways from classical yoga of Patanjali and builds on it. As you see that image of Ananta Shesha, it's a tantric image, and it uses Patanjali. That verse is from Raja Bhoja's commentary on the Yoga Sutra, which is a sort of early medieval commentary. So there's already sort of tantric ideas circulating, and that's I think that the yoga that we practice nowadays is more oriented toward that. Yeah. So then it's important to understand that these concepts of Purusha and Prakriti, of Shiva and Shakti, don't map perfectly onto Purusha and Prakriti, because Prakriti is precisely everything that Purusha is precisely everything that Prakriti is not. Right? In classical Sankhya, Purusha, there's no definition of Purusha. Purusha is just not this, not that, not that. So they use the technique of negative dialectics to define what is Purusha, that is, what is consciousness, with the thought that any idea that you might have of consciousness, any sign or symbol that you associate with it, well, it's not that, because all signs and symbols and thoughts belong to the realm of phenomena, belong to Prakriti. So they're precisely not consciousness. Consciousness is the openness, it's the sort of, it's just the open spaciousness within which things appear. And, but the Shiva Shakti concepts are different in this way, that they are not just sort of conceptually and interdependent, but they are, the idea is that they're just two different aspects of one and the same thing. And what that thing is, I mean, it's often just called, in Tantric Shaivism, it's often called Shiva, with the understanding that, Shakti's inside of Shiva, that Shiva can't dance unless Shakti decides to, dance within him. So Shakti's the source of all desire. She's the one, she desires to be seen, to be experienced, to be known. And so she animates Shiva insofar as Shiva is embodied. Whenever Shiva is embodied, whenever there's a splinter of Shiva as the consciousness of a particular sentient being embodied, and it's drawn to contemplate what is, to know what there is out there, it sort of directs attention. That's Shakti working through Shiva, right, to fulfill her own deepest longing, which is to be seen, and indeed so to be contemplated, right? She wants to be contemplated, and so she wants to be known through the minds and senses of other living beings. And for the minds and for the intelligence inside living beings, especially human beings, to kind of wake up to grander and grander understandings of what it is that they're actually seeing when they're experiencing her movement as life. And so, and this is the final idea, because this is the most extraordinary idea, is that from this Shiva Shakti way of looking at things, is that the world itself is an experiment in consciousness contemplating its own creative potential. By allowing its creative potential as Shakti to manifest as the phenomenal world, and then beholding it. Beholding it for what it is. And so then yoga, on the tantric idea, is just to participate in that self-contemplation. You see what I mean? It's to realize that your consciousness is itself always already involved in that cosmic contemplation, in the contemplation of consciousness of what's unfolding. So all the progression of human knowledge and all meditative insight is just part of Shiva contemplating Shakti. And to wake up to that, and to not just to think it, but to kind of, for that to truly come alive for you, you know, for you to sort of realize that, and to feel the inherent exuberance of that, and the extraordinary aliveness of that by participating in that contemplation. That's what the tantric yoga is. And a practice like Ashtanga Vinyasa is a tantric practice for sure. I mean, no question. It's not, doesn't come from the Yoga Sutra. It comes from the, you know, sort of tantric revaluation of the body and the development of practices like pranayama, breathing practices, and asana, which is, as we do it, also a breathing practice, to really feel those cycling movements of energy, and to contemplate them close up, to allow them to cycle through the body and to dissolve all of the different thought structures that limit and confine. It's very windy here. That limit and confine our. Shakti's trying to get my attention. She doesn't like what I'm saying. I'm getting it wrong, maybe. That limit and confine our perceptions. You know, to allow those things to dissolve, so that new perceptions can form, and the space can open for new insights, in which there's more clarity, more intimacy. That's just what these practices are.
But it's funny that yoga practitioners, or Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga practitioners, I think we have this thirst for understanding, and it's something that I see in the average Ashtangi very, very much.
Yeah.
This thirst and this wanting to understand, and why are we doing this practice, and what is this whole thing about, and I want to learn philosophy because I just need to put the pieces together. And it's funny that we usually draw our main understanding from the Yoga Sutras, which is definitely fantastic. But all this maybe tantric approach, it's not that commonplace, I would say. It's not that commonplace in the sense of interpreting what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah.
But then, for example, all this vitality and all this richness of the yoga, of the breath, of all this mythologies, if you like, then you see them. Like, if you look at Hindu gods, they're so colorful, and there's so much imaginary, there's so much wealth of symbolism, there's so many stimuli coming at you, and they at the end of the day, they are evoking and waking up something inside of you that is already there, just connect with one image, and and that's how it works. But for some
and that's, of course, Yeah, I mean, that's a core, there's a kind of precept of meditation in the tantric world is that in order to meditate on a deity, you have to install that deity somehow in the body. Because the deity itself is just, it's understood to have different forms, like it might have, certain forms that just are mudras, certain forms that just are sonic signatures, like the pranava, like Om, for example. Or other sort of bija sounds, or certain images, and those things are all just like different aspects of one energetic construct that can be installed in the body. I mean, let's take, using the example of mantra is super nice because it's very vivid the way that traditionally it's understood that you work with mantra. So if you have a particular sound that is the sonic signature, of it, there's a particular vibratory pattern, right? And that just is what the deity, that is the deity. And so how do you install that in your body? Well, you just say it a lot. You say it, and so that you're hearing it, so that your body is literally being immersed in that vibration, right? Until it just starts to kind of resonate in your mind continuously. And that is traditionally a sign that that particular deity has been installed in you. And then you can then sort of meditate on that vibration. And a lot of those sort of old images then from mantras, like the second verse of the Ashtanga invocation, those are called dhyana shlokas, which means a support for meditation. And so what you're supposed to do with that image of Patanjali is not just like hold it before the eye of the mind, go, oh, that's a really cool image. Like, wow, look at all those serpent heads. But the whole idea is that you install that image in your own proprioceptive awareness, right? And then people go, well, how the hell do you do that? Well, Surya Namaskar, that's how you do it. You do it with the yoga, right? I mean, that's just it. You reach your arms, you spread your serpent's hood, you fold down, you're through all of the squeezing and the lifting, those basic archetypal patterns of a kind of energy that is, in the first place connected to the earth, but then in the second place being lifted up, like from the pelvis, which is the earth of the body, through the use of Mula Uddiyana Bandha, lifting that earthy, supportive, aponic energy to the altar of the heart, makes the pranic energy excited, and then it expands, right? And then there's a sense of flow, of movement that all Ashtanga practitioners know that experience. When you do a really wonderful practice and then you lie down in Shavasana, it's like the whole body is humming. And there's like a sense of energy moving out away from you. And it seems to be like carrying with it all of the sediment of unprocessed experience. Like you feel that intensely, that that's working. And then but then there's something that's also kind of wrapping back in and coming back in toward the center of the heart. And that whole process is the subject of Hatha Yoga, the way that energy cycles and circulates in the body, in the way that you can the way that you can work on a physiological level with the 5 pranas, the airs, the winds, to stimulate that movement that's always already happening in the body, because it's the movement that's keeping you alive. It's the movement that, it's the movement that I'll give you one more. I'll give you an example that I find still very, very compelling, which is that, there's this idea in Hatha Yoga that when prana and apana are in balance, that it excites some kind of prana to rise from the altar of the pelvis through the hollow center of the body, right? And sometimes that's called kundalini. Although Krishnamacharya insisted that actually it's prana that rises and kundalini is the obstruction, but that's kind of, anyways, we'll set that aside so as not to confuse anyone. But let's say that when prana and apana come into balance, then some other prana or kundalini shakti rises through the hollow center of the body. And as it does, it sort of burns through these different psychical centers, releasing, energy from our that's been sort of pent up energy, that whose entanglement represents different aspects of our mental conditioning. So that's coming unraveled, right? We're becoming emotionally unraveled in a way. And that energy goes all the way up, if you're lucky, and it makes it all the way to the crown of the head. Then it melts the disk of the moon. And that's of course, Shakti meeting with Shiva,
Oh.
the lunar principle in the head. And when she unites with her beloved, then a cool lunar rain falls back down into the body, And so that whole description is, it's so rich. There's so many levels to that. It's, but it has to do with the whole, archetypal, energetic movement of aspiration, of spiritual aspiration, and of the aspiration of life to evolve, right? And then of the melting of the lunar disk is the descent of grace, the kind of the answering of that aspiration, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
But that movement, especially the ascending part, but not just the ascending part, has a striking physical manifestation in the development of the human body, okay? The individual human body. So, and I'm no embryologist, but my basic understanding of this is that between about the second and third weeks after conception, there are two fluid-filled sacs. One is called the amnion, one is called the yolk sac, right? In utero, like when after sperm and egg come together,
Yeah.
then these two sacs develop, and a seam suddenly forms on the interface between these two sacs, a seam of soft tissue, okay? And embryologists call this, deliciously, the primitive streak, the seam of soft tissue. And it moves in linear fashion. It just starts, like you don't know where it's going to start. There's just these two fluid-filled sacs touching. Suddenly, somewhere along their interface, a seam forms over the course of several days. Then, from the top back down, it thickens. So it goes up and then it goes back down and it thickens. And that seam, and then that structure, now there's like this shaft of soft tissue, and it's called the notochord, and all chordates have it, right? And it forms the first physical structure of your body, and your whole body organizes around that, right? And in some chordates, you come out of, you keep that for your whole life. For most mammals, it's not the case. Maybe for all mammals, but certainly not for human beings. It segments, it breaks apart, and it becomes your intervertebral discs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So now here's the mind-blowing part. The point, the bindu, out of which that primitive streak forms, out of which that seam of soft tissue forms, is what eventually becomes your pelvic floor.
Oh.
And the upper terminus is the soft palate.
The palate?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that first primitive movement of Shakti that shapes, your physical being,
it's here.
Traces exactly, it's the same pathway, the same movement, that same pattern is reiterated in the hatha idea of what it is for Kundalini to awaken and to arise. You see what I mean? And of course, your whole body is continuously reshaping itself around that central axis for as long as you're alive. It doesn't stop until the moment of death. Then it stops. when the body's no longer reorganizing and it just dissolves, all the physical structure of the body. But until that, some intelligence is constantly drawing material in, releasing material out, and reorganizing it continuously to shape this around that central axis. And so that movement of Kundalini Shakti that Hatha Yoga is describing, it's, it couldn't be more primitive, and it couldn't be more, I mean, it's not just physiological, but it is primitively physiological, And so in these practices of Hatha Yoga, where you're working with Mula Uddiyana Bandha to draw this energy up, you can think of it, if you like, as kind of bringing consciousness to this movement of vital energy that's always already happening anyway. And in bringing and quickening that movement, quickening it, like enlivening it, making it more pronounced, right?
And so the way to do that is through the breath.
Yes.
So the breath is happening anyway, but we are so disconnected from it.
Yeah.
Even when we start practicing many times, even a few years into practice, I think it takes, you are lucky if you stumble upon this type of information early on, or maybe even if you stumble early on, sometimes it might escape your understanding, but you can spend years and years doing your practice as a form of movement,
Right.
external movement, and not really knowing what you're doing, why you're doing it. You start to question the reasons. It becomes this heavy thing, this burden, this obligation. You do, but there's no this, like, my experience at least is when you switch your perspective and go deeper into this very rich and real inner experience, then the motivation is there.
Yes, that's right.
You don't need any motivation to be on your mat. It's just
That's
like,
right. Very good. Yeah, because that energy, it wants to move like that. It wants to be seen. The Shakti wants to dance. Your breath wants to expand. And it's just that, like, the egocentric mind, with all of its stresses and all of its fears, all of its resistance, it makes the breath strained and labored and short. And so to find a way of breathing that is not strained and not labored and not short, but smooth and easy and rhythmic, and indeed, at least sometimes, at least while you're practicing, deep, that can, the mind follows, and it becomes, its movements also become less tense, less taut, more fluid, and then eventually, more affectionate, so that your thoughts are, being, because the energy of the heart is now stimulating and inspiring your thoughts, so that they can sort of, pour forth with greater ease, but without catching you up, without tangling you up on anything, and so that you can't move forward.
I loved that you mentioned affectionate, that word. Sometimes in the Ashtanga yoga world, and I think we are very clear on discipline. I think that's very clear for everyone. You do this 6 days a week. Yeah. So the discipline, it's very clear, but sometimes we might miss out on the softer, if you like, aspects of practice.
No question.
You have to be there, like that affection, the energy of the heart, and that if you like last for life, even like that. Maybe it sounds a little weird, but like this, like wanting to be like fully involved in your immediate experience. I think sometimes we fail to see that. And
absolutely. I mean, we're taught from a very young age to fail to see that. We're taught from a young age that in order to make something of ourselves, we need to discipline ourselves. We need to go out and become something. And then we approach spirituality and we go, oh, it's like that. oh, look at Ashtanga, it has such a rigid discipline. I bet that's potent and effective. I want to do that. And then, and you have all these, oh, look at all my achievements. Look what I can do now. And look at me. And, it's the ego game.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's very good for hooking someone in. But as soon as you're hooked in, you got to get past that, because the yoga is about receptivity. The heart is a receptive instrument, that we don't listen to our bodies. We don't listen to the wisdom of our bodies, and this is perhaps, sort of encapsulates one of the great sort of maladies and indeed tragedies of our age, is that we've sort of stopped listening to the wisdom of the earth, to the wisdom of balance, to the wisdom of flow, to the wisdom of reciprocity, which is all, part of breath itself. Breath itself is a kind of reciprocity with our surroundings, but instead we think that we look out on the world and we think we're going to manipulate and control it and bend it to our circumstances, right? Yeah. And that's the ego sort of dominating and just making a mess of things. And when we do that with spirituality, it's okay in the beginning. It's all right. It hooks us in, it gets us going, but it has to be seen through, relatively soon, so that the yoga practice can become about receptivity, about feeling these movements, from the inside, and holding space for them in the way that Shiva holds space in his relationship with Shakti in her different incarnations, as Sati, as Parvati, as Kali, that he never tries to manipulate or control her. Oh. He never tries to get anything from her, right? He's always just kind of holding space, or, adoring her, loving her, no matter if she's showing her awful, dreadful, violent, terrifying faces, or if she's showing her magnificent, elegant, gorgeous faces, because he represents just the consciousness that's just open to whatever is there to unfold. And that's the consciousness in which the different tangles of our conditioning can actually expend themselves, can actually, release. It's when we stop resisting and suppressing all of the different things about ourselves that we don't want to look at, the things about ourselves that we just, the things about the world that we can't bear to think, the things about our situations and circumstances that we'd rather not acknowledge. We feed those things, we give them energy. They become demonic precisely from our suppression of them. And the classical and tantric teaching about these things is that those things need to be released from the prison of our minds. Those demons we are holding them captive and making them demonic. And that if we allow them to come to the surface of our consciousness and we hold them in a space of open, loving awareness, they kind of they change their form, they lose their shape, and the energy that's contained within them is allowed to dissipate. And what's revealed is usually something very different, much more tender, much more benign than we thought it was. And that's a kind of good, basic metaphor for the process of unraveling through Hatha Yoga itself.
Yesterday, I saw a primary series leg class that you have on YouTube, if I'm correct. It was like about 2 hours long. And I like that because sometimes I'm a very slow practitioner. Sometimes I'm like extremely slow.
Yes.
And so like doing some of this like hardcore classes is good for me because it keeps me on track. Otherwise, I just like I'm stopping and smelling the flowers, but I like I do, as a practitioner here, I do see the virtue in taking it slow sometimes, especially at some point in your life as a practitioner, and also if you're teaching. you need to take time to break things down. And it's not so much about yoga drills as it is about feeling,
That's right.
opening up like all the sensitivity of your body. And that's very hard to do when you are following
That's
extremely military rhythm. That's how I see it. So
Yeah.
yesterday I saw that leg class that you had. It's like, that's fantastic.
Good.
Yeah, I was wondering, Ty, what's your practice? What your practice consists of nowadays? Because you seem to have a very deep understanding of this yoga. And so I'm wondering, what does your practice day looks like?
Well, I'm just mad about practice. I'm just super passionate about it. I just love it as much as I ever did. And so, I always, I like to sit in the dark when I first wake up. You could say I practice meditation if you like, but mostly I just sit and listen. I always do that, and then I do some pranayama there, and then I go and practice asana after that, and yeah. So, and and my asana practice is breath based and flowing and rhythmic and practices, receptivity and it's also it's evolved into something. What I found is that in really tuning in and tuning more and more into the rhythms of the body and the rhythms of the breath, my body has led me outside of the conventional sequencing of Ashtanga, which I spent 15 years doing it,
Learning the rules.
by the book. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, and it's a few years back and, and I would always experiment a bit and sort of move color outside the lines and all that. But I guess in the last 2 or 3 years, especially since the lockdowns in the pandemic, I really just started just letting the body guide me, and so I follow in that way, and I found myself having very deep, vigorous practices that combine, all the advanced poses that I was practicing before in the other series, but in different sequences, and often doing different variations of a single posture and sequence. Like I find myself doing that a lot. Like before taking a vinyasa, like sometimes doing as many as 4 variations on one side, and then and it's just evolved like that very, very naturally. But it's been also super inspiring to me. Like it's been very reinvigorating in a way to practice like that. It's really given me a new sense of excitement that's been with me now for about 3 years. Because I never really know what's going to happen on each day. I never really know what I'm going to do or, where it's going to go. And that's always, I don't know, there's a certain excitement. There's a certain excitement to that. But it's, I wouldn't be able to do that, but that I practiced my scales for so many years, practiced those Ashtanga sequences in the way that I did. Yeah.
I'm wondering how that experimentation and that experimentation and not just going so much by the book, how it has impacted your teaching, because you're talking about inspiration, you're talking about surprise, you're talking about life, and which is fantastic. So how do you see that reflection into your teaching?
It is reflecting in my teaching, and it's almost like too early for me to say exactly. I don't have. It's something that I'm watching with again, a great kind of excitement because it is impacting my teaching. And I am showing, many of my students different sequences. This, especially students have been doing Ashtanga for a really long time, doing the same thing all the time, maybe for too long, because people, you can really stagnate in that. The body doesn't, the body, I mean, that on the one hand, the body loves the rhythm, like it loves that rhythm of like getting up every morning, doing those sun salutations, like, and then getting into it, getting all juicy, like the body loves that. And, and if you don't have some repetition, you don't get the same kind of deepening, So people who do like free form vinyasa without any structure, I think they're missing out, they're really missing out. But people who do conventional Ashtanga with ultra rigid structure are also missing out. I think there's some kind of sweet spot right in the middle where there's, exploration, and there's more variety, in the way that you move, but yet always following the thread of breath and always like responding to the feedback that you're getting from the body. So, with a lot of especially my students who've been practicing for a lot longer, I've been, showing them other sequences, because they're never off the cuff either. I mean, I think that sequencing is a very sophisticated art. I mean, I have a great appreciation for it in Ashtanga, because to me, it's all about the way that you're cycling the energy through the body, the way you kind of press it, then release it, where it goes, how it expands. I find this just utterly fascinating. So I do, a lot of my own kind of research on my own body about those kinds of things. And then, I share some of that with my students, and it's been exciting for them. It's been like a lot of really great results have happened from that. So it's something that's really kind of like near and dear to my heart these days. And that I find very, very inspiring.
It definitely sounds refreshing. And if I look at my own experience, and also like other fellow practitioners and also students that come to me or that I work with, I find the linearity, sometimes you can get caught up in the linearity.
Oh, no question. Yeah, absolutely.
And not only that, there is also an aspect of efficiency and how you manage your energy. And I find that especially comes up when you're learning a new series. When you're moving from primary into second, then you get this super long practice. You have to pretty much forget about the fact that you have a life and other things.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But it happens as well when you're moving from second into third.
Yeah.
Then you're supposed to do everything every day, and then you're teaching, and then you're living.
And if you're 25 years old and you're single and you're unemployed and you're in Mysore, it's a great method. Pretty much beyond that, then I mean, it's sort of obviously, when it doesn't work, it just has to be bent, because it's a funny thing, I was thinking about this the other day, because, you mentioned my children before we came on. My wife and I homeschool our children. So they we teach them as they ask things, and they're learning to read, they're learning math, but, as they're interested. And, when we think about education, the education of our children, I think that most of us would assent to the idea that an educational curriculum has to bend itself to meet the needs of our children rather than vice versa. That we don't bend ourselves to answer to the curriculum. I mean, that's just oppressive in an obvious way, That traditional kind of way of thinking creates so much psychical dissonance. It creates, so much like lack of trust in oneself. It encourages kind of devastating self-critical voices, and certainly doesn't encourage anyone to kind of follow their inherent creativity, But when it comes to Ashtanga practice, it's like we just, like everybody's willing to say, oh no, this is the traditional way. This is how you have to do it, and it's kind of, I mean, it's striking, I think it's worth reflecting on very deeply, especially in ourselves, because it's useless to look at other people and go, oh, look at them, and then make some judgment about what they're like. But to see in ourselves our own attachment to doing it what's supposedly the traditional way, whatever that means. It merely means like, what's the conventional way this year? But doing it that way, why are we attached to that? And of course, the mind immediately goes, well, because the ego has its answers.
Yeah.
But you got to look into your heart, right? Like really, what is it really? What is it really though? Because probably really it's about belonging. It's about being accepted. It's about being validated. It's about being sure, right? And it's about fundamentally, you don't trust, probably there's a deep lack of trust in your own body. I mean, I'm not talking about first-year practitioners. First-year practitioners, you just need a method. You know what I mean? Like, somebody's got to show you, for the first decade, like you just have to like
that's a yoga apprenticeship. 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. But even there, if you're lucky, you have a teacher that's beyond that first 10-year phase, that's not just beating the hell out of themselves anymore, but that's listening to the intelligence of, listening to the intelligence of the body, and then can help the student, find different ways of continuously evolving the practice so that the practice is serving the student, right? Rather than, creating just creating a problem. And it's extraordinary because the yoga is not supposed to be a problem. It's supposed to be a kind of, it's a bit of a relief from the problem.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a respite and a solution, in a way. But, we want so badly, we have this kind of achieving perfectionist mind, and this idea that, well, we want to align with the tradition because that's the real wisdom. And otherwise, then what are we doing? We're just making stuff up. Well, or maybe you're listening to the deep intelligence of the body and allowing that to inform what you're doing. That's, to me, that's real education. That's what a real education would do. Like teach someone to trust themselves, to trust your intelligence, to trust your, the sort of deeper stirrings of your heart, if you can get in touch with that, because that will guide you to a rich, fulfilling life.
Yeah, definitely. I think that at some point you have to look beyond. You can choose how you practice. If you're more traditionalist, or if you decide to explore a little more, but practice in general, the way I see it, the way I've decided to practice, and that I decide to share it with others, it has to feel invigorating. It's not supposed to be something that you don't really understand what you're doing. It's something that we were discussing before. Why am I doing this? This is going to come up constantly. All this like self-inquiring, it's part of the process. But when you connect with what you're doing at a deeper level, when you find that deep communion with yourself, that something that you mentioned, that receptivity, that being able to allow things to express themselves without having to silence, having to repress, having to tag as good or bad, right or wrong. Once you develop that, the motivation is already there.
Yeah.
And then you can take any shape that you like. You can just go by the books, or you can just listen to yourself and relate to it in a different way. But I suppose that it comes from that deeper and very real and raw feeling of connection with yourself. It's not with the practice. with
Right.
yourself.
That's right. Well said.
And so in my eyes, it comes from me. I remember the other day I was practicing with my teacher, and I was doing, this is something that we ladies have, which you guys don't have. Just before our ladies' holidays, we feel horrible. And there are certain things that we cannot really perform. They're like super hard for us. And I just said, I have to stop practice here today.
Yeah.
So when you allow yourself, when you give yourself the right to take it slow one day without beating yourself up, just because the body is not there and the mind is not there, when there is no cooperation, I mean, then what are you doing? You're not doing yoga. You're just punishing yourself. Really.
That's
Dragging yourself on a yoga mat. What's the point? That's why I thought. So yeah, I'm enjoying this conversation very much, Ty. This is fun.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. And
talk about.
I do have a couple of questions that I'm sure people are curious about, which is we talked about a yoga workshop. Now it's dissolving, and you doing your own thing. So where is life taking you these days? Where's Thailand geographically? We know that you're coming to Madrid.
I'm in Spain now, and I've been here since October. It's mid-December now.
Spain is a place to be, Thai. Spain is a place to
Spain is very good. Yeah, I like it very much here. I spent a lot of time in Portugal this year also. But I'm gonna be teaching down in Tenerife and then in India this winter.
Purple Valley.
Back at Purple Valley. So we kind of keep up this little seasonal migration, But I've been spending a lot of time in Europe this year, and hoping for a certain dream that I'm trying to hold very gently, very loosely to materialize. Which has to do with teaching closer to home, moving around less, being in one place. So because I like to be with my family, and traveling around with the family is I'm so grateful for the great patience and fortitude of my wife and children, for traveling around as much as they do, and we've managed to have a good time with it. But I think that I can be. I feel more grounded, more alive, more myself when I stay in one place for a long time. And for the last several years, haven't had that luxury. But I'm inviting that. Yeah, I'm hoping that will come to fruition, and that I can have my next practice space will be, a place that people can come. That it will be in Europe probably, and that people can come and not just take intensives, but also just practice for weeks or even months on end. Probably, especially in the warmer months.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Sounds dreamy. Sign me in. Do you have a place for that, or any locations that you like for that?
Yet. There's some wonderful locations around that we gravitate toward, and we're knocking on doors and trying to see which ones open. But I don't have anything definite to announce just yet.
Okay. When the time is right.
That's right.
So, Ty, I suppose I've been holding you for like 1.5 hours. I'm very grateful for your generosity, and maybe we can wrap up our chat and I think that a good way to do it is maybe reflecting on how you see Ashtanga yoga evolving in the coming years, based on your experience, your own evolution as a practitioner and as a teacher as well, and also what you see around in the people that come to you and in the deeper work that you guys are doing.
Yeah. Well, so as far as, how Ashtanga is going to evolve, I have no idea. I have no special, vision into the future about how that's going to go. I mean, so far, Ashtanga's become more and more sort of, it's very popular now. It's a mainstream. I think you could safely say it's a mainstream yoga now, and it for sure. 17 years ago when I first encountered it, it was not. It was edgy and marginal, and and it's different now. And it's what the wonderful thing is just how many people are engaged in it. Just how many people are practicing Ashtanga. That's fantastic. Where is it all going? I have no idea. But I know that for myself, as a practitioner and teacher, I mean, I described that my trajectory has been sort of more and more, to explore more with different sequences and to sort of, to deepen my own sense of spontaneous receptivity with the way that I practice. And for sure, that's what I want to teach with students also. So I'm sort of cultivating and developing, various alternative sequences that seem to me really helpful for teaching, that to have those to share with students is just serves them better. So I'm doing that more now. I'm kind of diversifying in that way, but it's all coming from my own practice, from my own internal research, and to and that's where I see myself going with teaching. To communicate a vision of yoga that's not about sort of the performance of the ritual, not so much about, attaining this or that advanced posture, but understanding the practice as a self-contemplation, right? And as one that can be very, very dynamic and vigorous too, of course, at times, and energetic, and but that is ultimately about helping us connect more with the creative energies that are always already shaping our lives, so that we can kind of move with those more elegantly and more graciously, more fluidly, so that we can cross different thresholds of consciousness and move through the different phases of our lives, with this kind of graciousness that we are cultivating in the breath with these practices. That's what is exciting and inspiring to me now, and that's what I see in the future.
Thank you so much, Ty, for this.
My pleasure.
Finishing thoughts. They
Thank you.
were definitely very inspiring, and also this in my case helped me open up the mind to new possibilities as well, which I think it's something very important skill to have, not only on the yoga mat, in the yoga room, but also in life.
Yes.
This one needs to open up, and so that the different options that life can offer can actually come into being. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Madrid in a few months only.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
we'll be in touch.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ty. Say hi to Desi and Addie. and your
Yes, I
lovely
will.
wife.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll see you soon.
Okay. Ciao.
Ciao, Tay.